What's up, everybody? Rob Ferretti here. Welcome to the series where I am representing myself as my own attorney, which is a pro se litigant in a federal litigation against the government. Just want to point out, just in case you're new to this, I am not an attorney. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a planner, not an architect. I am interpreting things that I see. I'm doing my own research. I'm looking at case law. Anything that you see in this video should be treated for entertainment purposes only. I do have to make it watchable, so I do trim some stuff down. It is not my intent to manipulate or misrepresent any material facts in this matter. That being said, enjoy the show. All right, episode 8, where did we leave off? We left off with them approving my previous application, which was my second application. I proposed it initially with a garage/barn and a house, a separate structure. That wasn't going to fly. They weren't going to let me proceed with that without voting me down for res judicata, as they made it apparent. So we move forward and we find ourselves approved now just for the house. And it was not easy to get approved just for the house. Even though it was 6.83%, where 4.5% is allowed and significantly lower than anyone else on a similarly situated property has been approved for, it was still quite the fight because my neighbor kept bringing up and focusing on the YouTube aspect of the property and the fact that it was his interpretation that the conducting of posting videos on YouTube was not permitted by borough ordinance. They never addressed that. They held that against me forever. And when they approved me, David Hansen, who made the motion to approve the application, said this after hearing all the testimony.
I make a motion that we approve this application. And I've heard the applicant say that he will not, and I understand, and the enforcement issue. And that's, I don't believe it's, I know we take it into consideration, but I don't believe that at this point it's my responsibility to judge this on those merits. I'm going to stick with size, the lot, and variances that we requested.
Then Peter Lane quickly seconded the motion before anyone else could and added the stipulation that I can't do any commercial activity on the property.
I would agree to second the motion with a contingent that there's no commercial activity done on the property.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree to that?
Now, I don't know what to say after that. I don't really have a choice here because all I'm asking you to do, all I've ever asked you guys to do, is vote on my house and not YouTube. This is not an application to do YouTube in the borough of Rockledge. That's never been the case. On the first application, you had all the information that I had a YouTube channel, I post YouTube videos, etc., 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 and you voted that we were not going to proceed as a use variance. You didn't feel that changed the use of the property. But then my neighbor starts coming in, this guy speeds, he does this, he does that, and next thing you know, the entire focus of my land use application is YouTube from there until present day, and everything you're trying to do is to prevent me from being able to live on this property and develop this property because of my YouTube channel. So I agreed initially, and then we had to articulate what it is I was agreeing to, and he wasn't able to articulate it. They never actually articulated it.
Do you agree to that?
I
Okay.
You inside?
No commercial activity on the property.
interpret that however you want. You can
If I send an
email.
email, if I, like, what point
I think-
commercial, because we've been very loose with the term commercial activity here.
I think we're referring to, like, selling the cars or,
I-
doing the videos on the outside.
Car carriers.
Car carriers.
Yeah, car carriers.
The car carrier is an eyesore.
Okay.
I mean, all the way around.
Sure.
So as long as you're,
It's been painted.
irrelevant. I mean, I see it, we all see it,
And
it's
being
just,
that you have a commercial facility, I mean, you really don't need to use your house as a commercial way station or whatever in between wherever you're taking vehicles and not.
Okay, I'll park it off.
I mean, I have no issue with you having cars in your driveway. I have cars in my driveway.
I mean, if he's got to pick up a car, he can pick it up.
That's different, but it's not a regular thing.
It's not a primary garage.
it's not parked there.
And that's storing things there.
Well, we parked overnight if I'm going somewhere.
Dave, do you agree to the amendment to your motion?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And we'll have a roll call.
All we get was like, yeah, do you agree? But they didn't agree to anything. And Ken Dalecki, as the attorney, knows that they have to articulate what it is the condition is. He's done that previously. I don't understand what you're agreeing to or what you're offering, what you're saying. In this situation, you just like stamped it, produced the resolution, And in the resolution, the result was condition 15. And condition 15 said, I can do no commercial activity on the property whatsoever. And I'm like, well, that's not really what we agreed to. We were trying to figure out what commercial activity was allowed or not allowed. Now, if I go try to sell this property, everybody that would otherwise be able to have a home office or any sort of commercial use of their property, and when I say commercial use, permitted commercial use, because the whole point of preventing commercial use in a residential zone is you don't want to change the character. So that's why there are permitted uses within the A zone, which is where I am, the historical zone, which you can do in and on your property that don't change the character. And since they were trying to prevent me from doing something that they knew was legal in the town, they couldn't articulate it on the record, because if they put in a stipulation that just said he's not allowed to YouTube from his property, they know a judge would never allow that to stand. So this is how they articulated it, was just that I can do no commercial activity whatsoever as per my agreement on the record. Now I want to point out that all of this stems from maybe 10 YouTube videos that I posted from the time I bought the property up until we went into this remand hearing. I posted almost 600 videos over that 2.5-year span. I was doing like 4 or 5 a week. 10 of them. 10. So it wasn't even really like a big deal that this was the primary use of the property. I just didn't want to give up my right to do that on my property. So it wasn't about the monetary aspect of I'm going to lose all this revenue from not being able to make YouTube videos on the property, but it was my right to do so, and they just kept stomping all over my rights to make my videos on my own property, and I wasn't going to let that stand, and that's why we ended up here. So on September 17th, 2019, within the 45 days required to challenge this by the municipal land use law, we filed a prerogative writ lawsuit with a 2-count complaint. The first count was to challenge 2 conditions of the resolution. One was the filing of a deed restriction, which I contended devalued the property. The second count was condition 15, which permitted no commercial activity whatsoever on the property, which now prevents me and only me in the borough from being able to conduct any commercial activity where other people are allowed to do so. This was their way of getting around making a determination whether or not the YouTube activity that was being alleged was being done properly or improperly. And the second count was seeking monetary damages that they have to pay me for treating me differently than everybody else. The equal protection claim is the same claim that I'm fighting to this day in federal court. Their argument has always been very simple. It's just, if you're making money doing something, it becomes commercial, right? They've manipulated the gray area in the ordinances and just said, you can film, as anyone can film, but you make money filming, so therefore it's commercial. It negates the fact that there's a wedding hall in the town. Commercial videos, commercial photos, every week, no permits. There's an entire corporate park here. Companies filming their products, posting it online, no permits required. There are so many different uses that I am the only one subject to the lowest bar possible, that if you're making money doing something, it is now barred from being done in the borough of Rockledge, and that's not what the ordinances say. Now, a month later, Alan Bell, who represents the McCormicks, also made a motion to intervene, and we objected it, but it's a very low bar to intervene into an action, especially when you were an objector on the previous things. But I don't understand why they thought the borough was not competent enough to argue this on their own. The borough also weighed in on it and said, look, as long as we just focus on the 2 conditions that are being challenged and not the overturning of the entire approval, then we are not going to object to the McCormicks coming in. The judge did approve them, but stated, like, look, you can come in, but we don't need your input to adjudicate this. Like, you can come in and then state your case, but you don't have to be here. Then both the borough and Alan Bell wrote responses to my initial complaint calling it frivolous and saying, this is frivolous. The attorney should be sanctioned for even bringing this up. This is ridiculous. This has no merit. It's a completely frivolous lawsuit. We want legal fees paid on both ends. They both were in line as far as that goes. And you'll see where that got them come the end of this process. However, that was their response to my initial complaint, was that it was a completely frivolous and unwarranted thing, and the judge shouldn't even hear it, and it should be thrown out before it's even heard before the court. The judge decided it was warranted and put forth a scheduling order, which required us to go to mediation, which was a complete waste. Part of the mediation was they proposed a revised language that would hopefully appease us so that we could move forward. It was revised to say that pursuant to agreement on the record by the applicant, there shall be no commercial activity of any nature whatsoever conducted on the subject property, excepting therefore such commercial activity as may be permitted in a residential zone by the municipal ordinances of the Borough of Rockledge. So it really says nothing. It just says he's not allowed to do any commercial activity unless the activity is permitted. But the whole thing is they just refuse to identify whether or not YouTube is a permitted commercial activity or not by ordinance. They refuse to say that on the record because they know the answer. And I told my attorney, we're not going to finish this prerogative writ until we get the judge to address whether or not I'm allowed to make YouTube videos on the property and put this to bed forever, because I'm not going to let this linger over my ownership for the rest of my life. So as expected, the mediation didn't go anywhere. But after that, the borough made a motion to dismiss count 2, which was the equal protection claim, on the basis that they were seeking to remand the decision, saying that, oops, we just didn't word that properly and you can't hold that against us. That was a simple mistake. If you let us put it back before the planning board, we'll be able to revise the language to match the intentions of what the board meant when they were trying to articulate the conditions on the property. And they supported that with a certification from Planning Board Chairman Peter Lane stating that this is what I actually meant and not what I was intending to do by having condition 15 written like that. Give us another shot. We'll have a planning board meeting and we'll resolve this and hopefully put this to bed. Now, we argued that they had the entire planning board able to review the resolution for accuracy and consistency with what they were trying to do. However, the judge granted them the second bite at the apple, and he allowed the remand and also granted the motion to dismiss count 2, which was the equal protection claim, without prejudice, which is not a big deal. By granting a remand, it means the decision of the planning board is not yet final. They have another crack at it. That's just the judge saying, we think that this may hold up this whole process, because the equal protection claim invites discovery and the remand hearing does not invite discovery. It's based on the record of the meetings. So there's nothing there. This will be a quicker thing to solve. And if you solve this, maybe that goes away. Or if you solve this, maybe that proves the equal protection claim. But let's just put it to the side for now. So we dismissed it and we were going to come back to that later. So now fast forward to this remand hearing, which is a Zoom hearing, because this is during COVID now, believe it or not. And we are doing this Brady Bunch Zoom call. Also in advance of the remand hearing, Ken Dalecki put another version of the condition 15 as he proposed it to see whether or not Rockledge, New Jersey was going to be the first town in the United States of America to make YouTubing illegal.
Let me read into the record for those persons who do not have the ability to have it in front of them, proposed language to modify condition number 15. Quote, that, comma, pursuant to agreement / stipulation on the record by the applicant, comma, there shall be no commercial activity conducted on the outside of the residence, comma, including, quote, filming, end quote, period. However, comma, this condition / restriction of activity shall not prohibit the applicant from engaging in such commercial activity as may be permitted in a residential zone by the municipal ordinances of the Borough of Rockledge, end quote.
The limited purpose of this hearing was to address nothing more than the revised language being proposed by Ken Dalecki, and then the planning board members were going to determine whether they wanted to accept the language as revised by Ken Dalecki and proposed, whether they'd like to revise that further, or whether they'd like to remove condition 15 altogether. Those were their options. Now, the first part of this hearing was the board members commenting on what their thoughts were as to this revised language.
Hi, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents. I like the modification. However, I do feel like it is just, it's just referencing the ordinance, which I think is fine. And maybe, we shouldn't be restating anything from the ordinance here. So to me, that kind of makes it redundant. So in other words, this paragraph might as well not exist if it's just saying you can do what is allowed by the ordinance, right?
Well, the purpose of the inclusion of original condition number 15 and the continuation of language in potential revised condition number 15 was based upon the testimony of the objectors regarding conduct, in his opinion, of commercial activity on Mr. Ferretti's property by Mr. Ferretti, and the concern
Right.
of the planning board at that time that was occurring, and they wanted it to be specifically and clear in the resolution that this is prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
And you see how careful Ken Dalecki is with his words. This is Mr. McCormick's opinion of the conduct and his opinion of the ordinance violations. However, the planning board decided to use his opinion and his interpretation of the ordinances to restrict my use of the property.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Lane, can you add to that anything?
Basically, they wanted us to clear up the language also, because it just stated that he could do no commercial activity, which is not the case. There is certain commercial activity allowed by ordinance in the zone. So,
Right, that makes sense, yes.
but the big issue was the commercial filming outside of his house.
Right. But to the extent that there was filming or is filming allowed as per the ordinance, then it's sort of, I don't know, then that's when I guess it becomes redundant. But if that's not the case, then this is just clarifying. Overall, honestly, I think it's fine. I'd rather modify it to this clarified and revised version. I just feel that it's a little redundant. So in other words, if filming is allowed as per the ordinance, then maybe that's not clear. I don't know.
It refers to commercial filming.
This is their problem. You cannot figure out a way to articulate how to prevent somebody from doing something that's legal without being vague to leave room for interpretation, which is a lot of the ordinances in the borough have this gray area so they can manipulate them and give people different relief, which is exactly why we're here, and it's exactly why I have a lawsuit.
Okay, the original version did not take into consideration that there are permitted commercial activities allowed in a residential zone. The addition of that last sentence makes it clear, clarifies the prohibition to which Mr. Ferretti agreed, that as an exception, you can do certain things as long as it is in conformance with the municipal ordinances. We didn't want to continue to preclude or have the language preclude him from being allowed to do that.
Right, that makes sense, I think.
Well, that clarified it for me. Anyone else still confused?
I just wanted to say I agree with what Christine was saying. It seems kind of redundant, but I think the point is that we're just trying to emphasize that one point, even though it actually applies to everybody in town.
Now, I just threw Ted Brack's opinion in there where he was agreeing with Christine that it's redundant and doesn't really belong, because you haven't really heard Ted Brack speak in any of the other planning board meetings. So the fact that he's expressing an opinion here was worth mentioning and putting it in the video.
Mr. Dalecki, is this now what we feel that the court wants us to respond with, so that we're not, this portion of the lawsuit is then dropped?
Well, that's to be seen. However, the language that I'm proposing, in my opinion, I think will hopefully result in that. And I think it's fairer to Mr. Ferretti to have some of this language added so that he understands what his limits are and what he can and cannot do on the property based upon the planning board's approval.
I think that it clarifies the approval that was given.
Correct.
Whether it's fair or not is a subjective thing. I'm prepared to vote in favor of the revised language.
All right, slow down there, Sparky. That's David Altman right there. He is an attorney, also now the vice chairman of the planning board, but not at this very moment. But he is another guy, him and Peter Lane will demonstrate through their actions on this video series that they are against anything that I do. They are not out in the interest of fairness, And ethically, neither of them should even be allowed to vote on any of my applications or anyone else's for that matter, because they're not even compliant with their own applications. So let's just remember these two guys. These are the two key players and Ken Dalecki that are going to start forming what my case is going to look like when it goes to trial.
Well, before we even get to that point, we obviously will want to hear from Mr. Stamos on behalf of Mr. Ferretti and Mr. Ross on behalf of Dr. McCormick.
So I'm going to skip through a lot of this. You guys can go watch the entire hearing. It's going to be up in its entirety. The link will be in the description. But my attorney, Dean Stamos, goes up and provides my defense effectively that we're just looking for them to get rid of the condition, right? Like, we don't think it belongs. We think you should take it out. Now, I want you to start paying attention. You'll notice Ken Dalecki, who is supposed to be in an advisory role. So when the planning board chairman asks for advice or something like that, he gets it. He's actually conducting this meeting by himself for the most part. About 90% of the stuff that's supposed to be done by the planning board chairman is being done by Ken Dalecki, which is not procedurally proper, but it is Ken Dalecki trying to support and cover his own ass and litigate this versus just having a hearing and letting the planning board proceed as they should.
Is the plaintiff's position that we think condition 15 should be stricken entirely. I think it is redundant in the view that it states you can't do what you're not allowed to do, and then including filming, which no one else in the whole town is limited to doing. And then it says, but you're allowed to do but what you're allowed to do. So you're not allowed to do what you're not allowed to do, but you're allowed to do but what you are. And then the filming part, again, you're still vague, it's still overbroad, and it's specific to my client.
Mr. Stamos,
Yeah.
didn't your client make a business decision effectively in an effort to assure as much as possible that he would get his approvals and therefore agreed to this condition? And if so, how do you justify his position now, after the fact, after he had his approvals, in seeking to have it excised from the resolution?
Easily. Like I said, I think it was under difficult circumstances, under duress, and I'm not going to put it in the black and white of a business decision like that. So that's why we filed the action. And again, I think, as we discussed, and it was on the record with the judge, that wasn't lost on her either. So I just think I don't see the harm in excising this condition, because it's still, he can't, if you think it's illegal, he can be charged with whatever violation someone thinks it is. But I think you're trying to appease a neighbor who has a house 300 and something feet away from my client's property line. But as there's an accessory structure with a camera pointing towards his house. What are we really talking about here? It's I just think that it's unfair to my client, and it should be excised.
Now, before we get to Dr. McCormick's attorney and ultimately his testimony here, I want to point out that when I was in my previous planning board meetings to get approved, I pointed out that Dr. McCormick, claiming that he was so aggrieved by my activity on the property and it bothered him, that he had no idea when I was actually filming or doing anything. So his complaints that he's losing his quiet enjoyment of his property based on my filming 5 videos a year was complete hogwash. And his response to that was he put up a security camera on the second floor of his garage, looking over the fence, recording my property now 24/7. So whether or not he's aware of when the filming actually takes place or anything takes place on my property from here on out, at least he'll have sufficient information on his camera to go back and be able to lie about it with confidence.
Rockley has a commercial filming ordinance that I would like to show, but I guess I can't. And what it says is that commercial filming by default is prohibited within the Borough of Rockley, both inside and outside, and on both public and private property without a permit. It also seems reasonable to conclude that commercial filming, when permitted, should be a unique one-off or singular event. The application and the $750 fee per permit seem intended to regulate and limit such activity. Nevertheless, our concern is that the commercial film permit process may be utilized as an expected, ongoing, and perpetually renewable transaction that essentially would allow a property to be used as an ongoing commercial film and production studio, both inside, outside, as well as in any accessory structure or building. In addition, if filming were continuously allowed at any chosen place or time, subject only to a renewable on-demand permit, then such a loophole would potentially allow the establishment of an ongoing film studio and film set, both inside and outside. Once any permit is issued, this would create a precedent and expectation of a second, third, and fourth, etc. Taking advantage of such a loophole would have the following consequences. It wouldn't be just the videos. Once you have an ongoing film set, you have the noise, the props, the potential storage of abandoned cars, a commercial fleet, vehicle hauler trucks, ingress and egress of cars and trucks that are associated with those film sets. Other activities that can be used on that property as a staging area, a showroom, a storage site, all things that we documented in our testimony on the previous two applications. He could lend or lease his property out to friends, colleagues, and commercial sponsors, films or cable networks to allow them to film commercial videos on his property, which he did with some of his, with one of his employees. So that's a concern. And then what about our privacy and the borough character? He could film anywhere on the property, even right up to our property line with us in the background or Piermont Road, as he's done in the past. In addition, the ordinance about commercial filming as written could be easily manipulated and abused with substantial noncompliance. For example, one could film 10 videos and say they were all done within a 4-day single permit time frame. One could film under an umbrella and say we did it inside. One could lend or lease 36 Piermont out to friends or colleagues. And in the end of the day, Rockley just doesn't have the resources to oversee, enforce, and to otherwise manage this ordinance as a renewable right. So based on these considerations, we respectfully request that the board consider some of the following questions and concerns as they craft both the language and the intent of this condition. For example, will any commercial filming be permitted on the 36 Piermont property? And if so, where? Inside, outside, or an accessory structure? How will inside and outside be operationally defined? Will the permits be limited? How and by whom? Will permits allow anybody else but the owner to film on the property? How will the establishment of the ongoing functional film set be prohibited here? This is a problem. With all due respect, this is not about eBay or selling a car or something like this. Mr. Ferretti has 777,000 subscribers to his YouTube video. He has over 250 million views thus far. His advertisements, he's got sponsors, product placement. He sells materials on his website. This is a highly commercial site that we showed in evidence on both applications, and we're just not in a position to show that again. But to say that it shouldn't even be regulated or this should be just thrown out, I think is really troubling to me. I'll stop there.
Mr. Stamos, do you have any cross-examination?
Yeah, just to respond in part, and then I'll also call my client who's also on. We went from someone filming himself using his iPhone or his phone to you're talking about film sets, about exaggerations of releasing it out to people. I'm like, let's kind of focus on the reality here. No one has a film set and staging, and whether he has 10 followers or 1 million followers doesn't make him really make him more or less commercial. It's the activity of, and just the nature of his filming. We can't just overstate it and leave it at that. It's not, all of a sudden it's going to become like one of the movie studios now in, Hollywood or something. You have someone who's like filming a brief statement like that, and it's think exaggerating like that is not fair and not accurate to the facts.
You know, we have kids, you know, we have a pool back there, we have a yard back there, we have a life back there. And so that's what's concerning to us, is that who decides, you know, where do you draw the line with this in terms of what's allowable? And right now, if you look, there is an ordinance on the books in the rules and regulations that very clearly states what commercial filming is. And he clearly qualifies as commercial filming, and it's clearly prohibited in the absence of a permit that is intended to be rare and a one-off singular event, not an ongoing renewable expectation.
Again, the type of filming that, to my understanding, is occurring is not like a film crew. And I think that the ordinance would be, hey, if someone wants to film a story or a movie, something like that, you pull a permit. So I disagree that it's to that level in this case. So I know Mr. Ferretti, I'm sure he'd like, if I can call him up, I guess if you let me know, Mr. Delecky, when would be the appropriate time.
Are we through, Mr. Ross, with your client?
Anything else with Dr. McCormick?
No, thank you for the time.
Sure.
Is there anyone who is logged into this meeting who wishes to ask a question of Mr. or Dr. McCormick? Having heard no response, let's move to your client, Mr. Stamos.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Ferretti, obviously you've heard the comments here today, and you've heard the testimony of Mr. McCormick with regards to your properties in relation to each other and your conduct on the property. Is there anything you'd like to convey to the board?
Sure. No, I mean, this has been going on for quite some time now. And I really think we're manipulating a lot of gray area with commercial filming permits and with the activity that actually takes place on the property. Mr. McCormick, I've pointed out or Dr. McCormick, I'm sorry, I've pointed out in the past, has misrepresented the type of filming that's taken place. He's under oath during our planning board meetings was saying that the lights for me filming at night somehow have ruined his quiet enjoyment of his property, and that the dialogue from me filming videos on the property had interrupted his lifestyle. And then when questioned as to when these videos took place or if there was any proof of that, there was none. And the response to that after the planning board voted the project through was to put a security camera up on the second floor of his garage shooting right over the fence. So now if there's anything that ever happens, he can go back through his video and say, that's when that happened. But that's not really something that's bothering somebody else. I mean, my issue that I have here is that the gray area back and forth, you're singling out my specific videos. My specific videos are me with a cell phone, me with a handy cam, or maybe one person filming. Anyone in the town is able to do that exact activity and put it up, whether somebody watches it, a lot of people watch it, doesn't matter. But during these planning board meetings, every single thing that I've touched was deemed commercial. His daily driver's commercial, that's his laptop's commercial, his phone's commercial. Here he's like my clothing, it was sponsored, so that's commercial. Everything now that is part of my life becomes commercial. And when you're open to that gray area, you can regulate the activity. If you say that the use of more than 2 cameras simultaneously in the intention of making one finished product, or the type of cameras, if you're using big studio rigs that make more noise, or they have to be attached to trucks or drones or anything like that, that would be what that commercial filming permit is designed for. It's designed for when law and order comes over and they've got craft service food trucks and parking lots for the staff. And that's really what a $750 commercial filming permit is for. It's not for anybody in this town going in their backyard, filming and putting it up on the internet. If somebody wants to watch, they're not. But then you get into the gray area. If I can do the same exact activity and post it up without ads, is it now commercial, or now is it just me posting something on the internet? And if you're saying the activity of one person filming themselves, putting it up on Instagram, Twitter, whatever, putting it on the internet for everyone to see is not allowable. I mean, I can't imagine a court upholding that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. But all these accusations of things that happened, we're also, in addition to the McCormick's tree line, we're adding another 40 some odd trees that the board said had to be added as part of the as part of the approval, which I didn't contest. I'll put some trees up. I put a berm out there around the edge there so we could build it up higher. I've got no interest in filming McCormick's. I've got no interest in them being anywhere in or about anything that I do, whether it's a photo or whatever. But there's almost like this nefarious, like I'm going to stick a camera over the fence and record them at their pool, which is the thing that they're doing to me. And I have zero intention, nor have I ever, before any of this happened. You can go back to any video that I've ever filmed on the property, and none of it has any sort of focus on his property or anything outside of me or whatever I'm filming on my property, which is the subject. And it comes down to, oh, if you look over the shoulder when we stop the video here, you could see the top corner of my garage. And at a certain point in time, we have to be realistic about this as to what we can regulate and what we can't. I mean, we have the right to tell one person that you can't do this because you're making money on it. And then the other person, everybody else can do it in the town. Everybody else can take the same camera that I have, make the same statements, videotape, whatever they want. But now that you're turning everything I touch into commercial and leaving all that gray area there, I just find it's a really, it's really targeted at me. And this isn't even my intention to be doing this. I mean, I do whatever, 100 videos a year. And I think 5 of them, or maybe I do more of it. I don't know how many I do, but maybe 5 over the course of 2 years or 10 over the course of 2 years took place on or in my property somewhere.
And just to clarify, your application was for a single family home, which is permitted, correct?
Correct.
As a use. And your variance relief were bulk variances, right? It was a side yard, lot coverage, right?
We did not go for a use variance. No, we
that
did
right?
not feel that
I'm
that
sorry.
was necessary.
I'm sorry, your variance relief that you got as part of the application were C variances, like bulk variances in nature. Okay, so yeah, I mean, what we're trying to say is that we're getting imposed a condition that's a use related on what's a permitted use and with bulk variances, and those are not, that condition's not rationally related to those bulk variances.
And that was one of the problems I had, feeling that I was voted down, and even having that written into the first denial letter on my first application. It's the fact that we're talking about filming when we're not putting forth an application for a use variance or for a film studio on site, to have these constantly coming up and thinking that you're no longer voting on my project or the house or the lot coverage or the side yard setbacks. You're now voting on what I do for a living or what I even do on the side. And that's not why we're in front of the board. We're in front of the board to put forth a house and initially a garage so I could utilize my property and enjoy the town, which I love.
Mr. Ross, you have any cross-examination?
I don't think Mr. Dalecki likes what I'm saying because he just cuts me off right at the end of my sentence. That's not how this meeting is supposed to work. That is not his position on this planning board. He's supposed to be an advisory role, not changing from the end of my testimony and telling me when my testimony is over and passing it off to Mr. Ross for cross-examination.
With respect to your prior hearings, do you agree that you stipulated at that time not to film outside for commercial purposes?
I made it clear during those hearings, and you can go back to the record and see that I would want a judge to determine whether or not that was legal. I felt that that was hanging over the application, and it shouldn't have, because if I got voted down because I'm not willing to let a judge decide that, I made it very clear on the record. If I'm doing something wrong and a judge decides I'm doing something wrong, I will take the appropriate action.
Let me interject here. I'd like you, Mr. Ferretti, through your attorney, to point out in the May 30th, 2019 transcript where those statements are made.
We weren't prepared, nor should we have been prepared, for the limited purpose of this meeting was, do we like this language? Do we not like this language? Do we want to revise it or do we want to remove it? That was it. This was not supposed to be rehearing the matter as to what is commercial, what's not commercial, what was said, what wasn't said. I mean, I wasn't expecting this line of questioning right now.
I think the planning board is entitled to support for those statements. And I'd like Mr. Stamos to show the board where they appear in that transcript.
Would you go on the record and testify that you are not going to do any commercial filming outside the house?
I would say that to allow that to be settled in courts as to whether that's a valid use of the property or not.
This could have been handled well in advance. Write me a ticket for a video that I made. Let me go to a judge. Let the judge make the determination. This whole thing about that keeps going on and on and on. We're covering the same ground so many different times and we would try dancing around the fact that we're talking about my YouTube channel. That's the only thing that we have an issue here with, which is this guy allowed to take a handy camera? To what extent does the filming become commercial? Not because there's an ad against it, but what extent does the filming become commercial should be the size and scale and massing of the production, not the size and scale of the reach.
Mr. Stamos, we're not going to re-litigate the entire planning board.
Yeah, I agree.
If I may, I have one more question for you. Page 5, page 7. Do you remember when your attorney put on the record, quote, wait, before, I just want to make one stipulation. I discussed with my client during the break that Mr. Ferretti will stipulate and agree that from this day forward, he will not do any filming outside the house. Do you remember that colloquy on the record, that stipulation?
I do remember that was in response to him saying that there's a good chance that they'll vote it down if he doesn't put something like that on the record. And that was...
Are those statements on the record also, or is that colloquy between you and your attorney out in the hallway?
I'd have to go back to the thing. There was definitely a conversation in the hallway. And I think in response, I've mentioned, again, I don't have the transcript here to say I know the entire transcript of 20 hours of testimony, word for word, would be incorrect.
Mr. Stamos, for statements to be made at a remand hearing that was set up months ago, notices went out weeks ago, I would have thought you and or your client would have been prepared to support such statements being made at this time in this hearing. And apparently that's not the case.
Do you remember when your attorney put on the record, quote, wait, before, I just want to make one stipulation. I discussed with my client during the break that Mr. Ferretti will stipulate and agree that from this day forward, he will not do any filming outside the house.
First of all, I want to thank, before I just want to make one stipulation. I discussed with my client during the break that Mr. Ferretti will stipulate and agree that from this day forward, he will not make any, he will not do any filming outside the house. And if the ordinance requires a permit to be made, if he wants to do something like that, he agrees that he will make whatever the appropriate application is for that permit. But from this day forward, he agrees and will stipulate that he will not film on the outside of the house.
But the permits will be applicable to filming inside?
I read the ordinance. I'm not so sure, but is it inside?
It says the borough of Rockland. Any place. Correct. I just read it. I hadn't read it until that, so I just want to make it clear that
where you're saying he's not going to film outside, but he'll go get a permit.
For the outside. For the outside.
I'll apply for permits if they need to apply for permits to film.
But we're not stipulating that we won't film inside. I think he has the right to film.
Let's just talk about outside.
Right, outside.
First you said he won't film outside.
Correct.
Now I'm understanding that he'll go get a permit to film outside.
Yeah, because that's what the ordinance looks like it requires. So he's willing to do that because if his application or his position is such that a permit is warranted, then it's an enforcement issue. It's out of the hands of the planning board.
So he's not agreeing not to film outside. He's just saying that if I do film outside, I'll go get a permit if I need it.
Right,
So we comply with municipal ordinance, period.
right, and if he says, and if the permit is denied, it's denied.
So they'll agree not to film outside the house without a permit if the permit is required.
Yes.
I'm not sure what he's given.
He's saying he'll obey the law.
He'll say I'll comply with the law.
If there is a law, then I'm happy to comply with it, if it hasn't been enforced to this date.
Because obviously that's been a big issue throughout this hearing.
So clearly we didn't even agree to anything. I talked to my attorney and I'm like, I don't know why they keep holding YouTube over our heads. Just tell them that if we have to get a permit, we'll get a permit. We won't film outside without a permit if one's required, but we're not agreeing or stipulating to not filming outside. We're just saying if there's a permit process and if everyone is required to get a permit, then we too will follow the rules the same way everyone else does. But nobody else in this town, there's maybe been 5 filming permits issued in the last 25 years, and it was always for like NBC or Law and Order or one of these big movie productions. And Ken Dalecki says, I don't know what you're agreeing to because you're not agreeing and you're not giving anything. And there's nothing to give because we're not doing anything wrong. I mean, I guess my issue here is that we're focusing on something where
Mr. Stamos, please, with your client.
Yeah. Okay.
I think he's had an ample opportunity to be heard. Mr. Ross, do you have anything further?
No, I don't.
First off, there is no time limit in this. So if I am testifying, I am entitled to complete my testimony. Ken Dalecki is not, nor should he be in a position to be able to cut me off if I am testifying in a valid setting. It's my microphone. So this shows you how agitated he's getting and how annoyed he's getting. If he'd like to respond afterwards or he has some sort of advice to give the planning board, that's fine. It's not his role to cut me off and then hand it over to his partner in crime over here. But then he continues on running the planning board meeting and opens it up to the public, to anyone who has any questions for me. This is not his job. He is not leading the planning board. The chairman is supposed to be leading the planning board. However, the chairman's just along for the ride.
If there's anyone who has logged in who has any questions of Mr. Ferretti, please speak up. Not having heard any, is there anyone, and I'll let Mr. Stamos and Mr. Ross have brief summary, but before we get to that, is there anyone who is logged in who wishes to make any comments regarding this remand hearing as opposed to asking questions of either of the 2 witnesses?
Yes, this is Roseanne Antine, 33 Rockley Road.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Antine.
A quick question, is this filming ordinance going to be and applying to everyone then in the town?
Running business.
Well, the ordinance exists. The ordinance regarding filming and permits for filming exists, and that ordinance applies to everyone in town. What we're here to do, and I was going to say this in a little bit, but we kind of got off the track of the purpose of this remand hearing, which is to determine by the planning board whether or not the planning board wishes to modify the language of condition number 15. But in answer to your specific question, yes, the ordinance as it exists applies to everyone in town.
But the new one then, or the concern for Mr. Ferretti's property would then also apply for such additional filming on your property and then posting it, because the concern is, I understand the concern of the town, I understand the concern of Dr. McCormick, but I also understand the concern of Mr. Ferretti. And if you look at what's going on in society today, there are a tremendous amount of postings by people, by children, by teenagers making YouTube videos and then proceeding to make what turns out to be a tremendous amount of, ultimately money from YouTube. So I think it becomes, where does this tracking and how do we, I think maybe it was Mr. Ferretti, is how do we, what is our concern here? And how do we look at this from an ongoing perspective? My thing is we don't want to have people running massive businesses. We don't want traffic. I think the town needs to look at how consistent we are with this approach of running commercial businesses out of our towns. That's one thing, which I don't know if we say we are consistent. But this is another avenue where I don't think that's what's happening here, right? It's a subliminal kind of thing. Is the concern from Dr. McCormick that his trees are being videoed or his pool? I think that's maybe something. I'm trying to see it from both sides, and I think we have to also be careful of how constraint we get on videotaping each other's properties, right? And being concerned that there's not cameras going in both directions and drones aren't going overhead and people start videotaping each other, right? But I can understand from a person who has teenagers who are also looking to do things like this, that you don't want to have to constrain everybody saying, oh my God, I see an iPhone in somebody's hands and they're regularly videotaping outside, whether they're getting in the, sweatshirt business and they're videotaping them and taking pictures outside, and now they're posting them on YouTube. So I guess the question is, how do we move forward here and make sure that we're logical for both sides? Just a comment.
Well, I have two responses, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Sure. The first is that the planning board in both hearings, 2018, 2019, apparently made a determination that Mr. Ferretti was conducting a commercial business on his property, thereby resulting in this condition that was added to the resolution. And we're here to determine whether or not language to that condition that the planning board felt a need to insert as a condition in the resolution of approval should be modified. With regard to the ordinances, we're not here as a planning board to address the content of the ordinance, how it should be applied, should it be changed. That's the function of the governing body. And if there's any issues with regard to the existing ordinance, I think that's the proper venue to approach it from, and not to the planning board itself.
So the planning board shouldn't be interpreting the ordinances. However, they did, and they used it as a basis of denial on the first application, and then added it as a condition of approval on the second application. But they shouldn't be doing that. Got it.
Is there anyone else in the public who wishes to be heard?
Can you hear me?
Who's
Hello?
speaking? Who's speaking, please?
My name is Marilyn Bresnak.
Hi, Marilyn.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get unmuted and muted. I have that kind of problem. Anyway,
That's
but
okay.
thank you for hearing me. I'm sorry for jumping in late. About a year ago, my husband and I were approached by Scott Lawns, and they wanted to film on our property. And I just want to point out that we did say no because I was going away. And my husband said, you're going to go away with the grandchildren and you're going to leave me here with what? Because basically when a crew comes in, it is very, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of equipment, there's everything. But from listening to everything that was said tonight, I'm getting the impression that Mr. Ferretti is not doing anything like that. He doesn't have film crews or lights or 20 people and producers and directors and actors, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if you're having to do something like that, people have to have union permits to be an actor. You can't have, you can't be a stand-in unless you have the card, a union card. So it seems to me that what Mr. Ferretti is trying to do is maintain his business using handheld cameras or a phone or whatever. That's what I'm hearing, and I think that it's like overreach that. And I think maybe there could be, I think it's overreach that we're punishing him not to be able to make a living. The other thing I think is that maybe there could be some kind of a solution that he doesn't film facing the McCormicks, but then I would say to Dr. McCormick and his wife, maybe you want to take down your camera because you're filming them. So, I mean, it just seems, I'm listening to it and I'm trying to say, wow, we have to come up with a solution because one, we're all neighbors. 2, this gets to be very, very expensive. And 3, it just seems that possibly, I want to use the word unconstitutional, but I don't think that's the right word, or the right phrase. But I think that if the man is holding his own camera, posting it on his own YouTube, and he doesn't have any other person without their permission in it, and he's not doing anything like that, then I'm wondering why it just doesn't get resolved or removed or really reworded. Because I don't think this is going to go away that fast if the board doesn't make big changes. I just think you have to use your wisdom, and I think you have to think about the consequences of this for everybody in town. I think you have to be considerate to Mr. Ferretti, who's coming into town and wants to maintain his business. And if it's not really imposing on anybody because it's a handheld camera or a phone, and it's not filming anybody without their permission, maybe they have to put a clause in that if anybody's in it without their permission, then that's a problem. But I really think that we're being really harsh, and I don't think the town should do that. I think that Roseanne is right. Are we going to start telling our kids they can't, or I can't, or you can't? Think about it down the road. Do we want commercial? No. Do we want film studios? No. Do we want all those trucks? No. It's like they told my husband it'll be a zoo. So we said, no, thank you. If he's not having that kind of a problem or that many people on his property, there is no problem, in my opinion.
So both members of the public were there, and they were both councilwomen. They're both sitting on the mayor and council. They were here as members of the public voicing their opinion, and they were both of the opinion that Condition 15 should be removed. Next up is going to be board discussion, and then somebody has to make a motion as to how they're going to proceed.
I do believe that this is going to go back to court if we put that wording that way. I think he should be subjected just like everybody else is, and it should be omitted. The condition should be omitted. And I believe that we as the planning board should send a letter to the mayor and council that they need to fine-tune the commercial activities in a residential zone, and that the issue should be resolved there. But I do feel that if we put this through this way, that it is going to go back to litigation.
I respectfully disagree. And to be clear, we are in litigation. Mr. Ferretti has sued us. For those that are attending in the public and don't know, we are in litigation. We are in court. So there should be no mistake about that. I think that the language is clear. I'm prepared to vote.
See, as I said, keep an eye on this guy. Despite all the testimony, despite all the commentary from the public, the members of the planning board all saying that they're unclear as to what they're even approving, David Altman and Chairman Lane are both hell-bent on revising the language and keeping this going indefinitely.
I honestly feel that we should just change the wording to make it clarified. I think what Ken put in the clarification is sufficient. This is what he agreed to. We did have, Carl, I know you weren't at the proceedings, but there were numerous times and numerous examples given of the only reason why that wording was even put in the resolution to begin with, which I think we should abide by what we originally intended, and by changing this wording to what the Ken has suggested, I think is going to clear it up. If he wants to pursue this afterwards, when it comes to changing it or specifying in an ordinance, I really don't think that's what we're here for tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I just feel that, I think that's what Christine and even Paul was pointing out initially, is that, you know, stating something that's already in the ordinance in relation to filming is not necessary. If he's going to film commercially on his property, then he needs a permit for it. But to define what commercial filming is, that's not up to us. So
we're not defining what commercial is. All we're doing is stating the ordinance. We're not telling him what commercial activity is.
Yes, you did. By denying me on my first application and saying what I've done on the property is considered commercial activity, you did tell me what commercial activity is. You said the stuff that I've done on the property is commercial and therefore not allowed.
So what do we have to vote on whether we strike it entirely or whether we go with the proposed edit?
Someone has to make a motion.
I make a motion that we modify the language to what Ken had suggested, because I believe that that is the point that they were asking for us to clear up. And that's what we're trying to do.
I second.
Who's that?
David.
David.
I'm gonna have a roll call. Ready, Peter Lane, yes. Paul Van Dyke,
No.
Theodore Brack,
No.
Demetrius Anastanos,
No.
David Altman,
Yes.
Christine Medvedev,
No.
Carl Porto.
No.
Okay.
So that motion failed. Another motion needs to be made, some kind of a motion.
Paul,
I'll make a motion to change it to the conditions that are in the zoning currently.
I second.
I'm not sure I understand what that means. Do we
That
have
to omit,
specific
I
language?
make a motion to omit condition 15 completely.
I second.
Who's that second? Carl?
Yeah, that's Carl.
Yeah.
okay, I'll have a roll call. Chairman Lane, no. Paul Van Dyke,
Yes.
Ted Brack,
Yes.
Demetrius Anastanos,
Yes.
David Altman,
No.
Christine Medvedev,
Yes.
Carl Porto.
Yes.
Pass it, right? Motion passes. Okay, thank you.
All right, victory number 2. Now, there are some logical and decent people that are still in my town, and most of them are. The problem is they're not in control. And the people that are in control don't belong there, and that's the problem that we're going to have to fix. But now that they've taken what's considered to be corrective action, they fixed the discriminatory condition by removing it, it was time to then have my attorney reinstate the second count of the complaint, because they've now effectively just proven that they've discriminated against me. And now my attorney has to reinstate the claim for damages under the Equal Protection Clause. However, my attorney started ghosting me, and I'm like, what's up? Like, hey, and even Ken Dalecki reached out to my attorney. He's like, hey, you spoke to me and you said you were going to reinstate count 2 and haven't heard from you, so we're just going to assume you're not going to do that. So I do this follow-up game with my attorney, and he just keeps ignoring me and ignoring me and ignoring me. And to the point where I'm like laughing, I'm like, Bueller, and I'm not emailing him or calling him weekly, but every couple of weeks I'm like, what's up? When are we going to proceed on this? This is going to time out. We got to move forward on this. And then he says, hey, I'm going to have to recuse myself. I have a conflict with another board member. And at that point in time, I don't want to be anywhere near this guy, but I just want to point out how, like, and I hate to tinfoil hat this, but how deep-rooted this thing is, because if you have a conflict with a board member, that's impossible. You're not allowed to take on a board member. If you have me as a client, I'm there first. So the board member conflict, you're not allowed to take him. So now say, like, I've got a board member that I'm representing that's superseding you. But he's like, here, talk to this other attorney. And that's what ended up moving me forward to another attorney who was unavailable. And then I had to go and find my own attorney, which is what brought us to this current federal action, which is where we're continuing today. So I'm going to show you on the next video. We're going to skip. I'm going to rearrange this. I know I put the list of how it was going to proceed. Next video, I'm going to go to my third application. So I'm going to focus on application 1, application 2, prerogative writ, application 3, and then the prerogative writ, and then I'll get into the remainder of the series. But stay tuned. It's a wild ride. As I do deliver here. I say it's a wild ride. I say it's incredible. I say it doesn't get any crazier than it's going to ever be. And what happens? It just gets crazier and crazier. I hope you're enjoying. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I will catch you next time and keep you in the loop as to how this is going to resolve.